Welcome, and thank you for joining us virtually at Kemper Museum of Contemporary Art for the Artist Talk with Dyani White Hawk. Dyani White Hawk is based in Minneapolis. She earned an MFA from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, a BFA from the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, and an AA from Haskell Indian Nations University in Lawrence, Kansas. Recently, she received the 2020 Bemis Alumni Award. She has also been the recipient of the Jerome Hill Artist Fellowship, the Forecast for Public Art Mid-Career Development Grant, the Nancy Graves Grant for Visual Artists, and the Joan Mitchell Foundation's Painters and Sculptors Grant, just to name a few. Her work is part of numerous collections, including the Eiteljorg Museum of the American Indians and Western Art, Walker Art Center, Denver Art Museum, Minneapolis Institute of Art, St. Louis Art Museum, the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian, Nerman Museum of Contemporary Art, the Tweed Museum, among others. Kemper Museum would like to thank Jack and Karen Holland for their support of the Visiting Artist Program. Their generosity makes it possible for Kemper Museum to continue to have thoughtful and engaging programs in conjunction with our exhibitions and projects. Thank you to our Kemper Museum docents who offer so much of their time and expertise in interpreting the exhibitions and permanent collection with such great energy and enthusiasm. Underwriting for the docent program is generously provided by the family of Mary Beth Smith. A special thank you to those who supported the exhibition, Dyani White Hawk Speaking to Relatives, Kemper Family Foundations, National Endowment of the Arts, and the Missouri Arts Council. Kemper Museum is sponsoring this program in partnership with the Missouri Humanities Council and with support from the National Endowment for the Humanities and many others. And a warm thank you to our Kemper Museum members. Your support of the museum helps to make all of our exhibitions and programs free. If you are not yet a member, it is easy to sign up. You can visit our website at www.kemperart.org. My name is Jade Powers, Assistant Curator at Kemper Museum of Contemporary Art, and thank you so much, and help me to welcome Dyani White Hawk.
Hello, can you see and hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah? All right, great. Before let's see here. Oh, I can only see myself. Okay. Before I launch into visual, I want to, I have a slideshow to share with you guys, and then some of the installation images. But before I launch that, I just want to quickly say my thanks and give my gratitude to Jade Powers, the curator of this exhibition. I am deeply grateful and honored that you took on this project. I'd like to sing Jade's praises for a moment. It's my understanding that this is Jade's first solo curatorial exhibition. And she knocked it out of the park and has treated me so well. And I'm so grateful for the work that you've done and that you chose me and my work for this big first of yours. And so thank you, Jade. And to Sean O'Hara, the director at the Kemper, to Will Toney, who I have had the great pleasure to work closely with in exhibitions, to each and every one of the Kemper staff. I know it takes an entire and huge team to make these things happen, and I'm grateful for every single one of you that have contributed, as well as to the funders. It takes a great many people to make large-scale projects like this happen, and each and every one of your contributions is acknowledged, and I'm grateful to each and every one of you. To Carmen Hermo and to Kathleen Ash Milby, who wrote for the catalog, and to the catalog designer, who I believe the name is Death by Coconut or something very close to that. And everybody that's contributed. I'm grateful for it all, and for the ability to have this exhibition. You know, I'm bummed that I'm sitting in my living room talking to you all and not, you know, in the galleries themselves, but I'm also grateful for the opportunity to be able to connect in this way, to be able to have this platform for us all to come together. This is my first retrospective exhibition, so it surveys 10 years of my work, and I'm happy to be able to share it with you all. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and share a little bit about, I'm going to hop back and forth, so bear with me. I'm going to share a few slides, and then I'll show you some install images. You got to see a little bit that you, hold on one second. I can't talk and navigate this at the same time. Play slideshow. So for those of you that were in the room while you waited for the talk to start, you got to see a few of the install images. So I'll share a few more. So we have at least an idea of what we're talking about, as opposed to just the PowerPoint. But as an introduction, I will tell you a little bit about myself and my studio practice. As Jade said, my name is Dyani White Hawk. I am Sičáŋģu Lakota through my ina, through my mom, and my dad is German and Welsh American, and there's some other things thrown in that mix too. And I am a visual artist based out of the Twin Cities in Minnesota. My practice is founded predominantly in painting, and I consider myself predominantly a painter, but I work in a wide array of mixed media. And as you'll see from the exhibition and the works that I'll share with you, I've also been working in video and photography and installation and some sculptural works as well. But it's all kind of rooted in painting, beadwork, and porcupine quill work, which is, this is just a couple shots of scenes from my studio. So I work in both acrylic and oil paint, and I do a lot of beadwork and porcupine quill work. So for those of you that may not be familiar with porcupine quill work, you'll see the porcupine quills on the bottom right-hand corner there. And it's an indigenous art form that predates beadwork and was practiced across the continent, essentially everywhere porcupines roam, and is still practiced today. And it's a central component to Lakota art forms. This is a quick introductory slide to kind of situate folks. For those of you who get to see my work, or if you visit my website, you'll see all of the works that I create for museum and gallery spaces. But there's a whole nother side of my practice that is specific for cultural practice that informs the works that go into museums and galleries. And so this slide is representative of that, so folks have an understanding of these cross influences that go into the create the final products that are in this exhibition. So this is just a picture of me on my graduation day when I graduated from the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, where I received my BFA. And at that school, so I got my AA and my BFA, as Jade said, from tribal colleges, which means I spent 8 years in tribal college communities that focus on teaching art history and national history from an indigenous perspective. So when I had my BFA exhibition, I had large-scale abstract paintings and cases of the work that I was doing in my traditional arts classes, which included beadwork and porcupine quill work and parfleche works. And as an undergraduate, those things were happening and being made all at the same time, but they weren't necessarily coming together in mediums, but they were coming together conceptually. So I was creating works that I still, use and dance in today, but they're not the works that I necessarily create to put on display in an exhibition. And I think it's important because I recognize not everybody has had Actually, very few people have had the same kind of exposure to the education of Native art and Native art history and its trajectory over the years that I have had, or that folks who have gone to tribal colleges or folks who have grown up in tribal communities have had. And so it's important for me to provide a few examples of Lakota aesthetics and Lakota art forms, so that audiences have a reference point for some of the influences that make their way into my work. A lot of you may be familiar with Western art history and the history of painted abstraction, easel painting, but you might not have references to painted abstractions such as the bottom central image here, which is abstract painting on rawhide. And then the top right, those moccasins are done in porcupine quill work. The buffalo robe on the top left is painted. And top bottom left-hand corner is a cradle board cover, and that's stitched in a lane stitch beadwork style, which is the most predominantly used style of beadwork in my tribe and in many Plains tribes. And then on the bottom right is a woman's dentilium dress. So these are visual references for some of what you'll see later. And then I do a lot of research and collections. And so this is just an image to kind of ground you and for you to pull from as you see some of the images of my own work in just a bit. So these are a pair of moccasins on the right that are again quilled on the inside and beaded around the edge. And then on the left is a moccasin vamp, which is essentially just the top of the moccasin before it's stitched onto the sole. So steer these images into your memory, and we'll come back to it. Okay, now I'm going to switch over to gallery images real quick, orient you in the space, and then we'll come back to the slideshow. Okay, so I just wanted you to be able to see a little bit inside the space so that you have an idea of how the show is organized, because I organized the slideshow according to the rooms. And the exhibition isn't necessarily installed chronologically, but there are kind of chronological moments. So this first room, this is the room that you enter first. And we are not on the first slide. Hold on. Go here. Okay, so this is the entry to the exhibition. And so we'll walk inside this door virtually, and this is the first room. And this first room holds the oldest works in the exhibition. So it starts in 2011, and so there are, I believe, 4 works in this room that are from my MFA thesis work in 2011, and then a few other works that go up through 2013. And then you can see the sight line that goes into the back room where you see the photo installation of these women here. So you would walk into that room next. But here's a couple more shots of this entryway. And in the same room with the photo installation is a video installation, which I'll show you a short trailer for. But these are just some images of this video installation, so you have an idea of how it's experienced once I'm speaking about it in just a bit. And these photos, for reference, are the women are nearly life size, and then they're hung from the ceiling, so they have a very strong physical presence in the space. And I'll get into details on all of these works in the slides, but I just wanted you to be able to kind of understand how it's installed before we get into those specifics. This is that front room again, but looking out. There's a beautiful Sean Scully piece on the right hand outside in the hallway that's not mine, but it is fantastic. And he is one of my favorite painters. And then you round the corner from the room where the photos and the videos are installed. And this is the next room where you see 3 sculptural works. And all of the works that are in this room are mixed media, including a great deal of beadwork. This is the Carrie series. The sculptural piece in the center here is part of the Carrie series. And then we round into another gallery space, and this space holds the Quiet Strength series. This is just the backline view of that other room. And we're back out front again. And then I will swap back to my slideshow again. Okay, so this work that is kind of the introductory work to the exhibition. This is the first sight line that you have to the right when you're entering the show. And this is really a pivotal piece in the trajectory of really finding my artistic voice and who I am, and what I wanted to represent of myself within the, I guess, greater lineage of painting and art history. So, and this was a piece that was in my MFA exhibition and has become an identifying work within my practice. The title is Seeing. It's a 60 by 60 inch oil painting on canvas. And this piece is the cloudscape in this piece is a South Dakota sky. I took a photograph when we were leaving the reservation. So I live in the Twin Cities. My homelands are in South Dakota. The Rosebud Sioux Reservation is in South Central South Dakota. And so we are kind of always forever traveling back and forth between South Dakota and Minnesota. And it's oftentimes can be a pretty strong juxtaposition between the pace and life on the reservation and pace and life within the city. And in this particular trip, we were coming back after ceremony, and then, transitioning back from that mindset back into city life is always fairly jarring. And so there's this moment on the land before you cross the river that always feels like a big transitional moment, and the geography starts to change there. And so I took a picture. It was a really beautiful day, and that's the picture that I used to paint this skyscape here. And these blocks were put in, and it creates this window that creates this 4-direction cross, which is an important central symbol that is embedded with kind of foundational worldviews for how Lakota people understand their relationships with the world and with one another. And so this piece is about how we each see the world according to our lived experiences and according to who we are as people and individuals, and our various forms of education and cultural experiences. So for me, that's illustrated or represented by the variation in the 4 blocks, the striping. So the navy blue swaths are these painterly stripes that are meant to represent, or they like pay tribute to the era of stripe painting and painted abstraction, easel painting, and specifically Sean Scully and other stripe painters that I'm very fond of. And then the beige color stripes are created by a compilation of vertical brush strokes that are hundreds of brush strokes done in this stacked lines, horizontal lines or lanes, and they're meant to reference the porcupine quill work and the beadwork that also defines my understanding of abstraction and art history. And so combining these things together speaks to the various forms of of artistic history and cultural influences that shape how I see and understand the world. So this entire first room, this is also a piece that was in my MFA exhibition, and is the first piece that I created using this moccasin form that I referenced before. I was looking for a way to create a central figure that, depending on how I adorn it, can either be very ambiguous, like these two pieces, or these three pieces, or it can start to get highly specific, regionally specific, or tribally specific if I start to adorn them in ways that reference beaded or quilled histories, tribal symbolism, color palettes. And I was looking for a form that would act as a central figure that isn't necessarily tied down by the specifics of the human figure. So if I were to paint a person, then I am, tied down by ideas that we naturally bring to the human form, ideas, if it's gender specific or racially specific or age specific or any of the specificities that come with actually rendering a human form. So the use of these moccasin tops was a way for me to create a central figure that still has emotive qualities and has, personality and can tell a story without necessarily being tied to a specific person. And I did this, I landed on this moccasin top because it's also very important for me to create pieces that have multiple entry points. I want to create works that speak to Native people. There is a tremendous gap of representation of Native people in our contemporary art spaces. And in the way that this country has historically told the story of art history on this land base. And so it's really important for me to create works that Native folks can walk into a gallery and see themselves, see their relatives, see someone they know. Maybe they're not maybe they're not from a Plains tribe, but they can walk in and be like, that's Native art. That's, that feels like me. I can relate to that. And that feels good. That's something that as people, we all need and crave, that self-reflection and identification and validity of our humanity and our lived experiences. So it's important for me to create, works that Native folks can identify with, even if they aren't necessarily art students, studying art history or painted abstraction. And yet at the same time, it's important for me to create works that speak to folks who are familiar with the history of easel painting and abstraction from that language. And so these forms allow me to navigate multiple entry points and hopefully create moments of intersection where we can have more holistic conversations that aren't about either or, but speak to the intersections of abstract history at large. So we have a lot of ground to cover. And I have to tell you about 10 years worth of my art in about half an hour. So we're going to keep cruising. If you have questions at the end, we're going to have time for Q&A. If you have questions about specific pieces, please feel free to circle back. This piece is titled Chante Skuya, which is sweetheart. Before we move into the next slides, though, one thing that I do want to point out, both in Dream, if you look at the space at the bottom, it looks like a kind of an entry point, and that's the space that you would put your foot into in a moccasin. And same thing with this piece, Connections, where the area where you would put your foot in starts to become a doorway or a point of entry. And I really enjoy playing with illusion and shallow space that makes you feel like when you stand in front of the work, you could kind of crawl into certain spaces, or you could reach in and grab. So I don't work with much infinite space, but I really enjoy those subtle illusions that kind kind of bring the pieces to life and make them feel like they vibrate and move in front of you. And this is a mixed media piece. So the dragonfly symbols on the blue moccasin and the 4 directions crosses on the red moccasin are beaded onto the canvas, and the rest is painted. And then these pieces, there's 4 pieces with this that utilize this motif in the exhibition. And this motif starts to combine those 2 motifs in the earlier works. So this arch form for me is like a further abstracted moccasin form, and at the same time that entry point or that doorway. And so it kind of serves the function, both those functions at the same time. And so this piece is beaded onto canvas, as is this one. And these pieces are let me back up a little bit. The color palette of the beadwork is very similar to the color palette of the stripe painting below it. And so the way that the way that art history has been taught and continues to be taught in mainstream academic spaces, and the way that it's exhibited in our encyclopedic museums is that art history, art with a capital A, is predominantly the history of European and European American, predominantly men. And oftentimes, you know, the way that it has been, I know we're chipping away at it, but we still have a long way to go. When folks are addressing history by women, history by people of color, history by Native American folks, history or the art history of LGBTQ folks and beyond, anybody who has been othered in our society generally has gotten different categorizations within the way that we tell our art history. And it's simply not representative of the truth. So a lot of my work addresses the lack of visibility of Native people and Native art in the way that we tell our artistic histories, our artistic stories. And the fact that Native art is othered on the land from which we are indigenous to is really illustrative of our national history at large. So these works combine stripe painting, the history of, influence of stripe painting and color field era and easel abstraction with beadwork. And the beadwork is done on top of the canvas, on top of those stripe paintings, so that we could, the audience is kind of forced to reckon with the histories that are embedded in those materials at the same time, because the reality is these art forms were being practiced and still are being practiced, but were being practiced at the same time and were influencing one another. Native artwork would not look the way it does today had we not had trade relationships with non-Native people, for example, to get glass beads. And this glass beadwork has become a quintessential Native art form, and that's a trade item. And the development of abstraction, especially during this era, the canonical artists of this era were deeply influenced by Indigenous art, but that's always taught as a side note. So these pieces are meant to kind of rearrange when and how we're thinking about those things. They're not two disparate histories, they're intertwined histories that can't be separated. But putting the beadwork on top of the canvas also forces folks to kind of reckon with that a beat before they think about the stripe painting below. So these are just a few within that series. These are all paintings on canvas with beadwork on top. And then, so we'll move into the next room. And this is a previous installation. This isn't the installation at the Kemper, but this work was first the Listen piece, the video installation. was first exhibited at the Plains Museum in Fargo. And so this is an installation photo from there. And I'm going to share the trailer with you. But before I share the trailer, I'll tell you a little bit about the work. So there are 8 monitors in this installation, and the title of the work is Listen. And in each monitor is a Native woman speaking her indigenous language for time for about, each video is about 5 to 6 minutes long. And layered visually is footage of the woman speaking and footage from the land that the woman and the language are from. So in each video monitor, you get to be introduced to a Native woman and the language and the land that those are all tied to. And the title of the work, Listen, it is meant, it's all caps, and it's meant to be that way. It's meant to create an opportunity for a moment of epiphany. So most adult Americans, we could walk down the sidewalk or sit in a cafe, and the majority of us could most likely identify upwards of at least 15 to 20 languages just by sound. Like if you sat down tonight and took a pencil and thought to yourself, if I heard the language being spoken, could I identify what it was, even if I couldn't translate, a word or a sentence? I know that's Italian. I know that's Chinese. I know that's Spanish. I know that's English. I know that, make a list. Think about how many languages you could identify just by the way they sound. And then make another list and think about how many languages from this land base, languages indigenous to this land, you could identify by sound. That it's most likely that folks could maybe identify 1, maybe 2. Most folks probably none. And that's absurd that we can identify that many languages by sound that are from other areas of this world, but we can't identify by sound the languages that are from here. So this installation is meant to provide an experience for a moment of epiphany, to understand the impact of colonization, to understand the impact of our nation's history, and the reality that not only would most folks not be able to identify very many languages from here, if any, but also most people have probably never even thought about it. That's profound. So it gives you an opportunity to stand in front of 8 monitors and be introduced to 8 different languages. It's a tiny sampling. There are over 500 tribes, federally recognized tribes in the States yet today, and there are many more that that either aren't federally recognized or that were lost, due to the forces of colonization. And so 8 languages is a tiny sampling, but it's big enough to create this experience. So this is just the trailer, which is a compilation of sounds and visuals from 8 of the first 8 videos. Oops, sorry guys. Sorry to interrupt. Jade, I need you to tell me whether or not you can hear the audio. Or somebody from Kemper.
Hey, Dyani, this is Graham. If you want to stop sharing, and then when you start sharing again, there is an option, I believe, on the bottom left that is share computer audio.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So, share sound. Here we go. Thank you for that. Okay, here we go, guys.
Eshbag give up mine or Mikiziwag, Bimasegma, Meswema, Gibiasha, going Gibiashasi,
Ja, kutsaan kutskuer, hem kutsaan kutskuer, katamom matakanave mvavak. Ja, kutskunyedik, njavi njevaik, njavi kumank.
Yudki pakuinenta naku pimenta itama kimta lulin iwa punta kin Wazokina ini karagiwi hahemanuinga hingaire unchi kakarajiwa onanka Eki anchara ha hemaninga hingaire. Eki hiuni hara chalk shopping there.
Selkino makam
Eki karajo.
Juliaman, Bashishilan, Yawis Quipum, Loyasla, Opim Riokansaman, Pokuyukum, Kramashoda, Ash, Yada Shitman Short, Company Sonnet.
Darn, kneel down from what he got. Darn it, ho, dini so, ni what gwenos, ni wagi at ho, darn it, ho.
Don't touch up hina. Yushki at the Inaku, Yushki, Chichak hina, you happy day. Hina, you watching bo, Doksta, a Kewachiakik day. You may talk you as.
Okay, so that was a short trailer, so you get to see a little snippet of each of the 8 monitors. And just a couple of notes on that piece. It's this first iteration is 8 monitors. I am going to continue to work on that project, and we'll be eventually building it out to an installation of 24 monitors for a very immersive experience is the long-term goal. And my partner in crime for that project is Dyani Lakota filmmaker Rizal Benali. I'm not a filmmaker and not a videographer, but luckily I have friends that were willing to play with me. And same thing with this work. This is, again, installation photo from the Plains Museum, but representative of the photo installation that's in the Kemper now. And my partner for this project is Ho-Chunk photographer Tom Jones. And this work is titled I Am Your Relative. And it addresses the issues of violence that are occurring at and have been occurring at ridiculous rates within Native communities and atrocities that our women, honestly, the movement has been focused on women and Two-Spirit relatives, but that violence has been perpetuated against all Native people. But this work is about creating visibility and creating this kind of collective force through the 6 women that are here that represent various tribal nations and humanity. So this work, I Am Your Relative, the messages across their t-shirts read, I am more than your desire, more than your fantasy, more than a mascot, ancestral love, prayer, sacrifice, your relative. And it speaks to the Lakota worldview that Mitakueasi, which translates to all my relatives, or we are all related, is the concept essentially. And it means it's a fundamental Lakota perspective that understands that all of life is related. that we as humans are all related. The health and well-being of us as humans are all related, but it doesn't stop at humanity. It goes to all of life. That interconnectivity exists between all life, human and non-human, the land, etc. And there's a deep reverence for that connectivity and those relationships. And so this piece provides the didactics on this piece provides some statistics on the violence against Native women, which is absurd compared to the violence against other women of other races in this country. And it's deeply impacts the health and well-being of our communities. And this work is meant to make people to ask people to stop and recognize our relatedness. So the way that I've explained this to folks is if you think about animals, and if you think about a particular animal that travels in families or in herds, when one of those relatives is kind of forgotten or is off away from the rest of their relatives, that's the animal that becomes the perfect prey. And I feel like that's representative of a lot of what is happening to Native people is we are not, our presence, the reality of Native people and communities, the reality of Native history, the reality of Native history and tribal and federal government relations, all of that is not taught in our school systems. Native folks are not represented in mainstream media, are very, very often left out of discussions in regards to diversity and representation. We are, have been purposefully ignored, neglected, efforts towards assimilation, genocide, etc. And because of that, predators are aware of the fact that the life of Native women is oftentimes not valued at the same rates as our non-Native relatives, especially white women. And so because of that invisibility, it perpetuates the potential for violence against our people. And so this piece is meant to kind of holler to people, hey, I'm your relative and should be treated as such. We need to learn how to collectively see our relatedness, see our relationships, see how the health and well-being of one person affects all people. And we need to act in accordance to that. And so having these women life-size in this space, you can't help but recognize their humanity. You can't help but recognize their individuality. And on the back of the t-shirts is their tribal affiliation. And they're each wearing designs that are specific to their tribes as well. So I'll keep moving on. I could talk on that one for a long time. There's a lot to say, but we don't have that much time, so we'll keep moving. So we're going to move out of that room and into the room with a lot of the multimedia beaded pieces. So this piece is titled Stealing Horses Back, and it is oil painting and beadwork on linen. This work speaks to ideas of cultural appropriation in fashion and predominantly in the fashion industry, but in cultural appropriation at large of Native aesthetics and art in mainstream American sources. So this work, I bought a pair of leggings that looked like it was trying to create indigenous design or Native design, but it's usually in the fashion industry. It's usually done really poorly because it's almost always done by non-Native people who don't have a deep understanding of our aesthetics or symbolism and color palette and whatnot. And so I took that design and I bit back essentially. I took the grid pattern from that design and used it for this piece, but then I started reinserting Lakota symbolism back into it and used a Lakota bead palette, specifically referenced from an old pair of Lakota moccasins in the National Museum of American Indian, and then did this beadwork in the lane stitch coming down over top of this jumbled, kind of confused bottom half that is really more representative of Lakota aesthetics. And the title, Stealing Horses Back, horses have really high significant value in our community. So this was about, how can we fight back? How can we take back something of value? There's been so much that has been stolen from Native people, land, culture, language, people. And the theft of our art forms is yet one more offense. And that's why you'll see so many Native people fighting for the rights to represent ourselves in the way that our visual language, our aesthetics, our names are used. So think about mascots and fashion and all of that. That's those are our artistic histories, and it's one more thing that's being lifted from our people. And so this piece is kind of a symbolic stealing back of something of value and bringing it back into our communities. This series is the Carry series. So there's various rationales and reasoning that has been applied over time to other different art forms, as I was speaking to earlier. And so this idea of the ways that things have been categorized, craft, self-taught art, functional art, things of the sort are rationale of why something is not high art or not fine art or art with a capital A. And this idea that if something is functional art, it's not possibly high conceptual art is one of those kind of arguments over the years. And I think it's a really poorly thought out argument, because I understand that within Native culture, our work historically was not, and in many ways today as well, is not separate from life, from all that we do and all that we are. And so our art is in everything, and it can simultaneously serve a functional purpose and also be embedded with cultural history, knowledge, cosmologies, spiritual worldviews, tribal histories, personal histories, family histories. There's so much that is embedded within our work that is representative of generations worth of conversations and knowledge, and it serves a function. And so these three works, the Carry series, are all functional pieces. This one is a bag, only it's very large and has very long fringe, so you wouldn't actually use it if you were going to dance and use it in the way that we would. And then these two pieces are beaded over copper buckets and carry with copper ladles. And this work is about, the title is meant to push back against those, one of those rationales that have been used to designate Native artists something other than fine art or high art. I believe all art has a function, even the most conceptual art that's only meant to create a conversation, that serves a function. If its function is meant to push back against the previous generation's understanding of art, that's its function. And these works could serve a function as well. And so the title speaks to what we choose to carry with us. what we choose to carry forward. What do we want to carry with us as we go into this next generation of art, and as we go into our next generations as humanity? The copper buckets speak to hierarchies, not only within the arts field, but also monetary designations and how we assign monetary hierarchies to mediums and to people and to, to everything. And it guides the choices within our society. And oftentimes that hierarchical system is what creates chaos in our world. So copper is one of the, on the lowest end of the spectrum of metals as compared to gold, but copper can purify water and gold can't do that. So what are we choosing to carry forward? What are we choosing to carry with us? And how are we assigning value is what these works are all about. And I know I'm running out of time here, so I'll get to these last series, the Quiet Strength series. So the last room holds 6 of the 7 Quiet Strength paintings that exist. This is the first one, untitled Quiet Strength 1. And this is a side view and a close-up detail of that work. So this Quiet Strength series, I had been using this motif that represents quill work and porcupine quill work and lane stitch beadwork as basically a supporting actor in a lot of my previous works for the last, since 2010 is really when I started developing this. And this was the first work that I decided that that motif was enough to hold an entire conversation. It didn't need to be a part of a larger narrative. And these works are meant to pay tribute to and honor the legacies of Native women and their contributions to the artistic history of this land base and to the history of abstraction. So the first one, let me backtrack just a moment. The first one, they also extend beyond just Native women. They're also meant to acknowledge the contributions of women at large to abstraction. So the striping on the side of this first one also pays tribute to Agnes Martin, who's one of my favorite painters as well. And those stripes allude to some of her color palettes, and they also allude to old school bead colors that were really coveted in our communities. And these first few are painted over a gold background, and completely buried underneath these marks that reference those histories of beadwork and quillwork. And again, playing with and kind of pushing back against those hierarchies that lift up certain materials and certain mediums as higher than or greater than, and push down mediums, materials, and people. Porcupine quills in a Western value system don't hold as much value as gold. But I know plenty of Native women that'll take quill work over gold and diamonds any day. So, value is dependent on the community that's defining the value. So these are our large scale pieces, 84 by 60 for this one. These are close-ups. They read as fairly monochromatic when you stand in front of them, but they're very multicolored. This one, the geometry is underneath, is in the underpainting. The underpainting is gold and silver. So you can start to see those diamonds emerge very subtly. And then there are 3 pieces within this series that extend the title from Quiet Strength to She Gives Quiet Strength. And this work pays tribute to, the unnamed Native women that have helped define and carry forth artistic practices and artistic history of this land base, of this continent. But it also, once this title shifts to She Gives, it also extends that recognition beyond our feminine human relatives and acknowledges our common mother, the earth and the land, and all that she gives to support and nurture and provide life for us. So these ones, the color palette is taken from stones from a lake here in Minnesota on the bottom half. And the form that it's painted in, the lines and the movement, as well as the colors, reference stone and water, rain, porcupine quills and glass and copper and metals and all of these things that are all gifts from the land. And this is the last in the series, the Quiet Strength 7. It's 84 by 120 inches. And this one is done, this also references copper, which is another element, another gift from the land. And turquoise, likewise. And one thing that I want to express is these push back against monetary value systems that compromise people and communities and devalue the art of certain communities and lift up the value of art by other communities. And they are meant to provide opportunity for us to have a conversation, to critique the way that we understand applied value. But they're also meant to create an opportunity for conversation for other forms of hierarchy. So we have been taught that the utmost form of strength is male prowess, male physical strength. But there are many forms of strength, and the feminine forms of strength, the female forms of strength that I've been predominantly raised by, are fierce and unwavering and unrelenting and amazing. And I know they are equal to that male strength, but they often look different. Same thing with intelligence. We're taught that academic intelligence is the utmost form of intelligence, but there are many forms of intelligence and we need them all. There are people that excel in emotional intelligence, musical intelligence, people like my husband, who's an athlete. The way that his body connects to his mind is something that I can't come close to. And I know that that's another kind of intelligence that is no less than, but when we bring all of these gifts together is when we make stronger communities, right? So these works are all meant to kind of push back against these hierarchies that we've been taught and start to think about how those things are applied. So the title of this series, Quiet Strength, is about that feminine strength that's unique to our feminine relatives. And the way that I example that is most folks know at least one person in their life that if somebody in your circle, in your family is acting out of hand, all she needs to do is shoot them that look and you will not challenge her. Doesn't matter how much bigger you are than her, how much older you are than her, the buck stops there. There's something about that that's specific to women and our feminine relatives. And it's a force, and it's that strength is unique and amazing. So this body of work is meant to pay tribute to those generations of women that have helped nurture our communities, nurture our artistic histories, and people. And this is just a close-up of this one. I got just, so these are larger iterations of that art form that I spoke to before, done in bugle beads. And that's the end, folks. We can go to questions. This is my website if you want to see other works.
Thank you so much, Dyani. What a wonderful walkthrough and talk about your work. Thank you so much.
Sure thing.
If anyone has any questions, please feel free to add them in either the chat or the Q&A. We do have one already from Elizabeth. Elizabeth asks, could you tell us more about vintage beads?
Oh, sure thing. So when the pieces are labeled vintage beads versus contemporary beads, it means that I've sourced very old beads that are generally Venetian beads or Czech beads that can oftentimes be more than 100 years old or could be somewhere around 80 years old. But, you know, glass beads are, you know, something that's been around for a really long time. And the technology within their production has changed over time. And a lot of times you can't get the old colors that you see in a lot of the old beadwork. So if you were to visit a museum and you got to go into the collections and see native artwork, certain tribes were attracted to certain colors. And so there's, you know, color palettes that have been kind of commonly used within a particular tribe. And so a lot of times we covet those old school colors that we know were in, you know, the beadwork of our folks. And you oftentimes can't see those same colors in contemporary beads. And so I collect a lot of beads, and a lot of those old beads are used in some of my work. And so sometimes, like that red bucket piece, the beads that I used in that are old white hearts, and I'm going to struggle to find those again. So the beads in that piece are precious. I can't just go buy them again at the bead store down the road.
Thank you. Another question says, the Quiet Strength series is so gorgeous, powerful. I'm curious to know if there's a conscious decision-making process when it comes to choosing whether to apply porcupine quill work versus the reference of porcupine quill / beadwork with paint.
Yeah, definitely. Porcupine quill work is an extremely time-consuming art form. First, there's a collection of quills. Then you have to wash quills. Then you have to dye quills. Then you have to soften quills, and then you stitch them one at a time to whatever surfaces you're working on. So I do porcupine quill work. I didn't show you guys examples of those pieces, but generally when I use actual quill work, they're on very modest size pieces because it can take a really long time. So even though the painting that references the beadwork and quill work is not fast, those paintings take me months to make. They are faster than if I were to actually quill them. And it allows me to size up. And that's important, especially for the conversations I'm trying to make sure are had within these contemporary art spaces. I want those conversations that the value and the history of Native arts and the value of Native people and voices to be front and center in these spaces, as they should be, because they have not been and they need to be. And so the scaling up is strategic, and it would take me years to quill something at that size.
Thank you.
Oh, Jade, I can answer a couple of these quickly.
Wonderful.
Yes, Tom Jones is the same photographer who photographs the plastic toy figurines. If y'all don't know him, look him up. How long does it take to complete one of your paintings with the multiple rows? Okay. The Quiet Strength paintings. The largest one took me 6 months to paint, but the last 3 months were double time. I was working over 70 hours a week. Not a healthy approach, but I had a deadline. So the others take 3 to 6 months. So they take a long time. It's not a fast process, but it's something I'm committed to. No, I'm sorry, Adina, I can't share my presentations, as in I can't hand them out. There's a student that asked if I can share the presentation. That's a sticky conversation, but you might want to have a conversation about why that would be challenging for an artist to do with your faculty. And you might have time to find out a little bit more about why it wouldn't be a good idea for me to hand out my presentations. Can you sew through canvas with beading needles? Yes, all those pieces that you saw that are in the exhibition are stitched directly. The beadwork is stitched directly onto the canvas. And I use beading needles for that. If you had to pick two of your work, which one would you feel more connected to today? All of them. I mean, they're all my babies. And we can't play favorites with our babies, right? So I'm sorry, I'm gonna blaze by that one. Jade, do you want to read the last one, or?
Oh, yes. The last question says, I was curious what ancestral lands the Kemper Museum of Contemporary Art is on in Kansas City. So we're on Kaw, Osage, Kickapoo, and Sioux.
Right on, Jade. And thank you, Lisa, for asking that. I'm over here in Minnesota. I'm on Dakota homelands. And today, Dakota and Ojibwe and Ho-Chunk and Métis also have a long history here too. I think that's, oh, I didn't scroll down. Where do you get some of your inspirations for your artwork? I think I touched on that a lot. So I draw greatly from the history of easel painting, of abstract easel painting, specifically very strongly from within the eras of stripe painting and color field painters. And I also draw very strongly from the trajectory and the histories of Lakota abstraction, specifically within porcupine quill work, beadwork, and painted parfleche work, which is historically female art forms. Today, that has shifted a lot because societal, and gender roles have shifted a lot within, the way we live our lives is very different today than the way our ancestors lived. And so our art forms aren't necessarily gender specific now in the way that they were historically, but those are the two strongest sources of influence for my work. The biggest motivation, somebody asked, what was the biggest motivation that made you become an artist? It is inherently who I am. It's always been my favorite thing to do. I have been making things for as long as I've been able to. It's always the place that I have been the happiest, the most content. When I'm not making things, I'm generally not well adjusted. And I really believe that we're each given certain gifts. And when we learn what those are and follow them, I believe that's what we are supposed to be doing. Those are our contributions to the world. And I believe that mine is creating work. Are there any other questions?
There's a question about, have you had any approach with the fashion world? I really love the design and patterns.
A little bit. I've had a couple people approach me. Like I had a company that makes glasses approach me, and some place that made rugs, and some place, like I've had a few, but none of them felt like the right fit. And if I were to go into a collaboration like that, it would really have to be a very healthy partnership, and something that made a lot of sense. But it's a good question.
Looks like maybe I see two more questions.
Okay, this question says, your art types are very diverse, but what is a major thematic change you saw your art go through in the past 10 years? So I think, Alicia, if I'm interpreting your question correctly, and correct me if I'm not, but it sounds like you're saying that the mediums that I've been using are diverse. Paint, beads, video, photography. But are you asking whether or not the concepts have changed over the years? I think that they have. A lot of that earlier work is really diving very specifically into art history and the way art history is told and presented. And a lot of the work that, the listen work that I presented is about language, and impacts of colonization. The photography work that is there is, specific to, violence against Native communities. The Carrie work, there's different themes throughout all of the works that were presented and that were spoken about tonight. So I think it's consistently evolving and moving throughout time. What medium do you use in your oil paints? That's so specific. Often, so I go back and forth between oil and acrylic, and it really depends on the piece and the needs of the piece. But I often use, oh my God, I'm having a total brain fart moment, but Liquitex is the media, like a quick drying medium that I'm having a moment where can't get to the name of it. But if you're an oil painter, you know what I'm talking about. Because I love oil paint, but I also don't like to wait for it to dry. So I generally use fast drying mediums. Okay, so Alicia has a follow-up question, especially as you learn more about your history, culture, etc. I think I expanded on that question as much as I'm able to from the information that was given. What is your feeling about your work entering private collections? That's a good question. I have a number of liquid. Thank you, David. Thank you, David. I was like, I could not get there in this moment. Yes, liquid is the primary medium that I use in oil painting. The private collections versus public collections. There are a number of my works that are in private collections, and I am always honored when somebody wants to live with something, that they want to invest that much of their resources and then bring something into their home and live with that work. I am always so excited to meet those people, and it brings me great joy, so I'm honored by that. There are certain works though that I prefer to be in public collections because I think that they are important conversations for the greater public to be thinking about. And I want folks to have access to those conversations, and for museums to be able to borrow from one another to create shows like this. Luckily, the folks that have been, the private collection folks that have been collecting my work are all very kind and generous. And there are a number of private collectors that lent their work for this exhibition in particular. I think both are really important. It's really a good thing to have a healthy balance of private and public collections. And I'm grateful for both of them. Advice for a beginner painter. Paint, 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 paint. Keep going. Don't be scared. Really take time to think about what is your unique voice. What is it that's specific to your lived experiences that you can contribute to the ongoing long conversation that is our artistic history. We all have something. You have a life that's unique to anybody else. You have something to contribute. You have something to say that is uniquely you, and we need to hear it. So think carefully about what that might be, and go for that. Work hard on developing that. Push, 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 and challenge yourself. Be deeply self-reflective, and ask yourself those hard questions, and find your voice. Yeah, that's my quick suggestion to beginner painters.
That was a wonderful suggestions. And thank you, Dyani, so much for answering the questions from everyone. And everyone, thank you so much for coming virtually to the Artist Talk with Dyani White Hawk. Thank you so much. And I hope that everyone has a wonderful night. And thank you again, Dyani.
Yeah, thank you everybody for coming. I really appreciate it. I wish you all good evenings.